Okay, the machine says I'm live. I must be live. Welcome, everyone, to the Walter Bosley channel for another Wednesday live stream where every week I get on here and talk about stuff of interest to both you and me. If you're new here, welcome to the Walter Bosley channel. Again, double that because we always like, you know, new faces around here, new folks in the live chat, or if you're not in the live chat, you're watching from somewhere. But thank you for coming here and checking out what it is I do. Now, today, I'm going to be talking about the gentleman responsible for a book that I know most of us probably have on our shelves. It's a book that caught my eye in the I think the late 80s, and I had to have it. And, for a while, it shaped all of our opinions on the topic of the Hollow Earth. And that, of course, was the book, The Hollow Earth by Raymond Bernard. Now, I'll show you. Funny thing is, I don't have my copy here, but I can show you the book, which, again, we're all familiar with this book. And I'm going to be referring to this. I should have had it. I apologize. I should have had it. Well, there's the artwork on the cover right there. You guys will all be familiar with that. And what I didn't know until very recently was that there was no Raymond Bernard. There it is up there, right up there. That's the edition that I got. The Hollow Earth by Raymond Bernard, but there was no Raymond Bernard. That probably shouldn't come as a surprise to us to find out that Dr. Raymond Bernard was a pseudonym of a very interesting character. Now, before I go too much further, I will welcome everybody who is in the live chat. Hey, there's Jay Trout. Haven't seen you in a while, Jay. Tessa1111, Crypto Alchemist, Leslie Payton, Mike Does, CJ Star Monkey, and I know I saw Megalithic Yard in there. Greg Betts, Ari Bavel, Megalithic Yard, there he is. Mick Connolly, somebody double dash or something. And I think I got everybody who's in there now, and I'm ready to start. So as you guys know, I won't be watching the live chat until I'm ready to take questions. So who was Dr. Ray Bernard? And what do we really know about his book, The Hollow Earth? Well, the book in question was published in the 50s, and it probably is I'm going to go ahead and say, the most influential source on the subject of the Hollow Earth in our times. Okay, it's probably had the biggest impact because the Bernard book is often the one that people start with when they get turned on to the subject of the Hollow Earth. And then they go on to learn about, the centuries of lore and other stories about this topic. You eventually learn about Agartha, Rex Mundi, the king of the world, and you learn about the subterranean worlds that the Paiute Native Americans, Paiute Indians in California talk about, and on and so forth. And of course, the tunnels in South America, which we will touch on today. Really, for most of us, it usually started with the Raymond Bernard book, Dr. Raymond Bernard. But as I said, there was no Raymond Bernard. Who was this guy? Let me turn on my little desk light here because we changed the configuration on the desk, and I need to read to you some things here. So, Raymond Bernard was really a man by the name of Walter Siegmeister. Okay. Walter Siegmeister, well, I'll just read a little bit here. First of all, his parents were born in Russia, and let's see, I believe they came to the United States. Let me get that right. Yes, specifically New York City was what I was trying to remember. Walter Siegmeister and the Hollow Earth. Now, I'm reading sections out of Lost Continents and the Hollow Earth, which includes I Remember Lemuria by Richard Shaver. Now, this is a book by David Hatcher Childress, okay, our good friend here. One of the next characters to step onto the Hollow Earth stage was a longtime spiritualist and health food advocate named Walter Siegmeister. Siegmeister was destined to take a mishmash of Palmer's and Gardner's writing and create the most popular Hollow Earth book of them all, appropriately titled The Hollow Earth. The book was published in 1964, not the 50s, I apologize, 1964, under the pen name Dr. Raymond Bernard. According to Walter Kafton Minkle, there's a lot of Walters today. I hope you can deal with the overload. According to Walter Kafton Minkle, in his book Subterranean Worlds, Siegmeister was born in 1901 to a family of non-practicing Russian Jews in New York City. His father was a doctor, and according to Kafton Minkle, Siegmeister was unusually concerned with sex and the differences between boys and girls at an early age. He was interested in these at an early age. Female menstruation, in particular, fascinated him. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago or so, I did an episode titled The Blood Drinkers, in which I talked about the practice of drinking menstrual blood to attain its special properties. Go back and watch that episode from just a couple of weeks ago, The Blood Drinkers, for more details on that. Siegmeister, being involved in spiritualist, theosophist, occult interests, having, as Kafton Minkle says, in what did he say? He was unusually concerned with sex at an early age, and in particular interested in female menstruation. So, what was this guy about? I mean, right off the bat, the first thing we learn about Siegmeister is this peculiar enthusiasm. Siegmeister obtained a bachelor's degree from New York's Columbia University in 1924 and his master's degree and doctorate from New York University in 1930 and 32, respectively. So this guy's an educated guy, okay? Siegmeister. We got a picture of him right there. It's more of an illustration, but that's him right there. Demonstrating his interest in the occult, his PhD dissertation was entitled Theory and Practice of Rudolf Steiner's Pedagogy. So that's how Steiner enters the story of Siegmeister. The man wrote his dissertation on the pedagogy of Rudolf Steiner. This is interesting, okay? It continues to, unusually at a young age, fascinated with sex and female menstruation, and he's a student of Rudolf Steiner. This is, by the way, what I said. Siegmeister's interests are no reflection on Steiner himself. Okay. This just happens to be the man's dissertation. He was such a student of Steiner that he writes his PhD, his doctorate dissertation on the man, on Rudolf Steiner. What's interesting is Captain Minkel, Siegmeister, Walter Siegmeister, was interestingly, I don't know, you'd call him a recluse, but somewhat shy, because Captain Minkel talks about only ever having seen 2 photographs of Siegmeister. And this one in this book was the only one I found. Now, here's what's interesting. Walter Siegmeister's brother was Eli Siegmeister, Eli, or Leelie, who's a composer, and you can find him online, but you don't find pictures of Walter very easily. According to Captain Minkel, Siegmeister moved to Florida in 1933, where he started a newsletter entitled Diet and Health. Now, he did become kind of a health advocate in nutrition, specialist, expert. He got involved with selling swampland to people and got sued for it. I mean, it's the classic, you want to buy a piece of the Brooklyn Bridge, or I'll say, swampland in the Everglades, right? This guy got caught doing this. So he was he got involved with questionable things. Siegmeister went to Ecuador in 1941 to escape civilization. He followed a friend named John Weirlow, who had left for South America in 1940. In Ecuador, Siegmeister and Weirlow attempted to found a new promised land at an isolated spot in the eastern part of the country. It was while in Ecuador that Siegmeister appeared in the May 9th, 1943 issue of the American Weekly. The sensational article was entitled, Hope to breed a superior race in Ecuador's secret jungles. The article is written by a J.M. Shepard. So, wow, out of the gate, we haven't even got to the Hollow Earth stuff yet. We find out that Dr. Raymond Bernard, the credited author of the well-known book, The Hollow Earth, okay, as David wrote here, probably the most famous book on the Hollow Earth. We find out that at a young age, he was fascinated with sex. He became particularly interested in the female menstruation. He writes his PhD dissertation on Rudolf Steiner. He's involved in a real estate scam in Florida with swampland. And now we have him involved with the pursuit to breed superhumans. Essentially, one of the main objectives of Aryanism of the Nazi Germany stripe. Now, this guy comes from Russian-born parents, and yet he embraces, which 1943, folks, that's when this article was written, he embraces a very German Nazi philosophy, at least in this wanting to breed a super race of human beings. Isn't that interesting? Because usually back then, Russian folks weren't too fond of Germans. Now, of course, he has a German name, but his parents were described as Russian. So clearly, we shouldn't be naive about these things. It's clearly a German family, from Russia. But hope to breed a super race in Ecuador's secret jungles. Now, we know the guy already is interested in Theosophy, and we know that Madame Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, some of her works run into trouble where the super race Aryanism issue is concerned, because obviously the Nazi bad men of the mid 20th century, they happen to embrace Theosophy. Okay. So we have to ask, was Siegmeister innocently going at this breeding a super race from the spirit of what Blavatsky talks about in her books, about there being, different races and this, that, and the other? Was he merely a student of engineered evolution, so to speak? I mean, in 1943, to be involved with the pursuit of breeding a super race, that's pretty Nazi, if you ask me. So, already out of the gate, this guy who wrote the most famous book on the Hollow Earth has some pretty bizarre and questionable interests and pursuits. Now, if you've ever doubted that the modern Hollow Earth myth, lore, story had anything to do with Nazi lore or post-war Nazi survivalist lore, that kind of thing, maybe you want to reconsider if you doubted that, because this guy's showing some pretty Nazi interests, if you ask me. And he's the biggest proponent in our times, the original proponent since World War II, of the whole Hollow Earth thing, you could say. He's the man responsible for its popularity in our times. And, they were big on the Hollow Earth. So was Siegmeister some kind of undercover Nazi? Was Siegmeister one of those, useful idiot types? His book wasn't published till 1964, but it included material that was written before then. So we have to ask, is there some sort of Nazi connection to Walter Siegmeister and his approach to the Hollow Earth stuff? I will continue. Let me move my little marker. In the article, Siegmeister and his associates proposed a paradisiacal society based on a raw food diet and natural living. Kind of sounds like the Volksmark March people of pre-war Nazi Germany, right? It was to be built on the eastern slopes of the Andes, and a new race would be created. But there was trouble in paradise because this big, tall, 24-year-old giant of a blonde man didn't like the idea of being used for these purposes, this breeding, super race purposes. He didn't like that. And besides, turns out that it was going to be faked, because the woman had a husband, and that man was going to be the actual father of the children. So what the heck? A scam on swampland in Florida, and now this scam with breeding the super race people in this paradise society in the eastern slopes of the Andes. Siegmeister, already out of the gate in this story, is a questionable character. Okay. Oh, Lordy, water. Now, Captain Minkle thinks that Siegmeister had a genuine desire to set up a super race colony in South America. But that didn't work out. Siegmeister journeys to California. He got into selling health foods and a couple of books that he had written. These were mimeograph type books that he pretty much produced himself. Siegmeister continued to travel for 10 years, living for a while in Hawaii, Guatemala, and Puerto Rico, where he sold mail-order health books under the name Dr. Uriel Adriana. Captain Minkle reports that all this time he was searching for the spot to create his super race colony. So he's going all over the place, determined to start this colony of the super race people. Finally, his mother passed away and left him a sizable amount of money in 1955. So we're already 10 years after the war, and this guy's still looking for a place to breed a super race. That's dedication. Siegmeister moved to Brazil on the money that his mother left him. He moved to Brazil and purchased a fairly large bit of property near the town of Joinville on the island of San Francisco do Sul, just off the coast of Santa Catarina State in southern Brazil. So he's down there in Brazil now, where the legendary tunnels are talked about, right? And the lost civilization stories have been discussed for years within a Brazilian context. If you recall, Colonel Percy Fawcett disappeared in the Brazilian jungle, the Mato Grosso, just 30 years. 30 years before Siegmeister gets the inheritance from his mother and moves to Brazil. Now, an interesting thing about Joinville, which I'll elaborate on later here down the road. Throughout his life, Siegmeister had lived on the income generated from self-produced manuscripts that he photocopied or mimeographed and sold through the mail as books. He wrote the self-published book Escape from Destruction in 1955 and sold it from, again, Joinville, Brazil, using the name Dr. Raymond Bernard. Okay? He had been banned by the U.S. Postal Service, okay, because of the essentially what looks like quackery, or was suspected of quackery, fraud, in his books. So he had to start using pseudonyms, and this was his first use of Dr. Raymond Bernard, which he will go on to use for the Hollow Earth book. In the book, Escape from Destruction, 1955, Siegmeister talks about the coming atomic war and how his colony in Brazil would be a safe place. The usual contactee ufology spiritualist community claims, that we hear over and over. He might be one of the original ones spreading that stuff. He also mentions a Puerto Rican psychic named Maita, who predicted that a global nuclear war would begin between 1965 and 1970, and by the year 2000, there would be no living thing left on Earth. How many times have we heard that? And we still hear it today. And no matter how many times you point to stories like this, where it's been said before, people are going to believe what they want to believe. Okay? Extraterrestrials, however, would take the worthy to Mars, where they would be safe. Okay? Classic contactee era nonsense. Siegmeister mentions lost continents, masters within the earth, and his belief that the female sex of human beings is the superior creature. In his colony, sex was to be forbidden. Women would ultimately regenerate through virgin birth, and eventually they would all have to move to Mars with the Space Brothers. That's Siegmeister. Okay, this is the guy who will eventually write the famous book, The Hollow Earth. The women will continue the human race through virgin births, but they'll have to go live on Mars with the Space Brothers. Me thinks that young Master Siegmeister, when he was a boy, so peculiarly interested in sex, makes me wonder what kind of hang-ups and neuroses developed in those young years. What was it about the female menstruation that he was so fascinated with. Did the whole thing leave him with a bad taste in his mouth? No pun intended, but it's there if you want it. And therefore, the idea of procreation through the traditional means, sex, turned him off? Did he have some type of weird view of women as eternal virgins, and somehow, a magical stork would come from Venus and deliver these babies? It's interesting. We don't know. We really don't know yet. But here it is in that first book, that 1955 book. He's already talking about, lost continents, lost worlds, masters within the earth. Okay, now, obviously, being a student of theosophy and spiritualism, he's reading, things about Agartha, and Shambhala, and the lost underground cities, or the hidden cities that T. Ilian writes about in his book In Darkest Tibet. Those kinds of things. He's a student of the lore. Okay, so it's forming a particular perspective in Siegmeister's mind. Now, he also in that book suggests that we could escape the coming surface cataclysm by going underground. So again, here we are. We see him moving towards what would eventually become his book, The Hollow Earth, right? So next section. If you're wondering, I'm reading from Lost Continents and the Hollow Earth by David Hatcher Childress, which includes I Remember Lemuria by Richard Shaver. Flying saucers from the Earth's interior. So here we go. About this time, Siegmeister, now firmly ensconced in his identity as Dr. Raymond Bernard, discovered a curious book published in Brazil in 1955 entitled From the Subterranean World to the Sky by O.C. Huguenin, a Brazilian writer and apparently, the director of the Theosophical Society in Brazil. Okay, so he writes his dissertation, his PhD dissertation on Rudolf Steiner, and now here he is, a student of O.C. Huguenin, who is, the director of the Theosophical Society in Brazil. Okay, if someone's going to know about the secrets of Brazil, would it not be Huguenin? Huguenin's book has never appeared in English, but Siegmeister translated large parts of the book after he obtained a copy in 1956 while browsing a bookstore in Sao Paulo. From the Subterranean World to the Sky relates Huguenin's thesis that flying saucers had been constructed over 12,000 years ago by Atlanteans. Okay, this is something that we often talk about here. The civilization of 12,000 years ago. Okay, a reasonable discussion. But here we have the ancient flying saucer theme popping up in this Huguenin's book from 1955. And this influences Bernard big time. Let me move my little note here. Now, according to Huguenin, Atlanteans used their flying saucer craft to escape the destruction and migrate through the holes at the poles to the inner world, where they reconstructed their advanced civilization. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? If you've read the Bernard book, The Hollow Earth, the holes at the pole. If you look at the graphic for this episode, you'll see the illustration, and I showed it earlier, the Hollow Earth cutaway. Huguenin argued that the features commonly attributed to UFOs made little sense if they were extraterrestrial in nature, but were quite logical if they were from the Earth itself. Now, I find that really interesting because I've personally been a proponent and advocate of the idea that the flying saucers that we're encountering the most, the UFOs, okay, um, they're from here. I'm open to that idea. You guys know, in my book Shimmering Light, in which I investigate and analyze and present my father's weird story from the late 50s. Um, I talk about this idea that there's a lost or hidden civilization um, living inside the earth. This is what my dad swore he was told by the Air Force at Wright-Patterson in the summer of '58, and and this, he claims, he swore till the day he died that this is what he encountered. This is who he encountered in the underground um, east of Winslow, Arizona, that same summer. So that is a theme you guys know that I have looked into, that I'm open to, the idea that we share this planet with a hidden group. And here, Huguenin in 1955 is pretty much presenting that same idea, right? And all the time, remember, it's 8 years after he reads 8 years after Siegmeister reads Huguenin's book that he releases The Hollow Earth. And if you've read that book, you should be recognizing the themes that end up in it already. Again, according to, this is from Childress's book, according to the Huguenin book, the UFO nauts were monitoring radiation levels on the surface of the Earth. There's always the nuclear, this, that, and the other, and had no intention of contacting governments on the outer Earth, the surface part of the Earth. Now, that's another point that turns up in my dad's story. He swore that he related that the people under the ground had no interest in interacting with us. Now, this is my dad telling me this starting in 1974, okay, and continued telling me, the same story for decades after that. All right. And he claims that he learned this in 1958. Now, of course, 58 is before Bernard came out with his book, The Hollow Earth, but I doubt my dad read Huguenin's book because, as I said a moment ago, it was never published in English. Now, is it possible that my dad had gotten a copy of the 1964 Ray Bernard book, The Hollow Earth? Of course, it's possible because if it was published in 1964, it was available. I don't know how widely it was available back then. By the late 80s, when I got my first copy, it was already in, all the major bookstores. Okay. But in 1964, I don't know how widespread it was. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting because that resonated with what my dad always told me, was that the people underground wanted nothing to do with us. And here's Huguenin in 55 stating that the people underground had no intention of contacting governments on the earth. So, reading on. Two other Brazilian Theosophists, an army colonel named Commander Paulo Strauss and a professor, Henrique de Souza, described Siegmeister as an archaeologist and esotericist. They were friends with Huguenin. De Souza and Strauss were friends with Huguenin and provided him with much of the information in his obscure Portuguese book. Okay, for that, but for what that's worth, these are the names of the people that were all involved in what became Bernard's book. In 1956, Commander Strauss toured Brazil, lecturing on UFOs and their secret base inside the Hollow Earth, which was called Agartha. He was presumably lecturing in an unofficial capacity apart from the Brazilian military. He may have been on an official mission to disseminate false information on the very real UFO phenomena happening in South America. That's Childress's opinion there. And think about it. Commander Strauss was a Brazilian military officer, okay? And It could be that he was being used to spread disinformation. Now, Siegmeister, the man who we're talking about here, the man who was really, Raymond Bernard, or he was really Walter Siegmeister. He wrote as Raymond Bernard. He claimed that Professor de Souza was in actual contact with Atlanteans of the inner earth. People in these communities claim a lot. It might be that de Souza told Siegmeister, okay, because we'll learn that Siegmeister was still a bit naive even at this point in his life. Let's see. According to Kaftan Minkel, Siegmeister paid a visit to the Theosophical headquarters in San Lorenzo to visit Professor de Souza. At that time, Siegmeister was publishing a newsletter from Brazil called the Biosophical Bulletin. Okay. Let me pull this note out of here. Now, this is what Siegmeister writes of that meeting with de Souza. On the sofa in the back of the room sat a young girl looking about 18 years of age. Much to my surprise, she was introduced as the professor's wife, though he was over 70, and I was told that she is a subterranean woman and really over 50 years of age, but retains her youth since subterranean people live much longer than we do. The professor began, this is Siegmeister writing this now, okay? I'm quoting Siegmeister. The professor began the conversation saying, I just returned from a visit to the subterranean world, where I am well known. I have frequently visited the city of Shambhala and once had the key of the door that leads to this city. Okay. De Souza even told Siegmeister that he knew of a number of tunnel entrances in Brazil. Okay, here we go. Tunnel entrances in Brazil. You know, the tunnels are talked about a lot in the Raymond Bernard Hollow Earth book and have long been a part of this lore. Going back to Siegmeister's writing, referring to the tunnels in Brazil, one was in the Roncador Mountains of the Mato Grosso, the area where the famous British explorer Colonel Percy Fawcett disappeared in 1925. So there we have Colonel Fawcett and his disappearance brought into this. And that has gone on to play an important role in contemporary Hollow Earth discussion and research. Okay. Fawcett is always brought into this. I'm a fan of the Fawcett story. As we say, I like to believe. I like to think that Fawcett found what he was looking for. Now, if you recall, Fawcett, as I learned when I was researching my book, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, Fawcett credits the Burton translation of manuscript 512 with being an important influence and reference and source in his own search for the lost city of Z. Now, if you recall, I point out in that book, my book, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, that, what's his name? I can't remember. I never did get his name, but there's a researcher who posted his work online, and he claims that Fawcett's lost city of Z was indeed Zarahemla of the Book of Mormon. So I looked at Burton's visit to Salt Lake, in which he spent time with Brigham Young, and he spent time with all the top guys in the Mormon Church. This was in 1860, the autumn of 1860, October. And I propose that Burton indeed was given some insider information from the Mormons, from their vault, what have you, about what they actually knew about these lost cities, this lost civilization in South America. And I argue that Burton, though he probably wasn't very impressed with Mormonism, he was keenly interested in their archaeological pursuits. Now, Brigham Young was a fan of Burton. In fact, when they visited, Burton writes of Young in their first meeting uh, going to maps of the world, various places, and was able to trace all of Burton's explorations in detail. Young was a student of Burton and was impressed with him and liked him. They hit it off. On a certain level, they were very similar, if not the same kind of men. And I argue that Burton indeed came away with insider information that served his time subsequent to that, 6 years later, when he was a consul, a British consul in Brazil, and spent all of his time on personal private explorations. It's in my book, Secret Missions to the Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. All of that. So I became convinced that it's very reasonable that Zarahemla of the Mormon archaeology, of the Book of Mormon, is the lost city of Z that Fawcett was looking for. Okay, so Dr. Bernard's book, The Hollow Earth, I believe may have been the first time I learned about Colonel Fawcett and, kind of begun my fascination with his case from reading Bernard's book, actually Siegmeister's book. Okay, there is no Raymond Bernard. It's Walter Siegmeister, this curious gentleman that we're talking about today. Okay, so let me get back to the Childress book. This is the most information I've been able to find on Siegmeister, by the way. That's why I'm referring to this book. The story of Colonel Fawcett and his ill-fated expedition to find Atlantean ruins in the remote jungles of Brazil was still very well known in the 1950s. The publication of Fawcett's son Brian's book, Expedition Fawcett, which I have the U.S. edition, Lost Trails, Lost Cities, and the works of Harold Wilkins. If you don't have the books of Harold T. Wilkins and you're interested in this stuff, you need to have them. They are essential. And those books are Secret Cities of Old South America and Mysteries of Ancient South America. I highly recommend them. They're a must-have in this topic. And those two, Brian Fawcett's Expedition Fawcett and the Harold Wilkins books really, really fanned the flames of keeping the Fawcett story alive. Okay. D'Souza, remember, this is the D'Souza guy. D'Souza told Siegmeister that Colonel Fawcett and his companions were still alive in the subterranean tunnels of the Roncador Mountains in an Atlantean city. Said Siegmeister, they are, quote, not permitted to leave lest they be forced to reveal its whereabouts, end quote. The entrance to the tunnels was guarded by fierce Chavantes Indians who would attack any intruder. This is according to D'Souza. D'Souza gave to Siegmeister a password that would enable him to pass the Chavantes guardians and enter the tunnels. Now, that brings me to another book that I want to jump over to. Because when you're talking about a password that helps you enter tunnels, so to speak, right? You think of the old Alibaba story and the open sesame, right? And some people have long ago suggested that that this cave of wonders, okay, these caves of wonders, these ancient treasure caves, tunnels, may have been remnants of a lost advanced civilization. And why couldn't those secret passwords have actually reflected voice activation technology? So what if it's actually the saying of the word opens up the entrance to one of these tunnels or a cave because it's voice activation technology? Could there have been such a thing long, long ago? Well, when we're talking about lost advanced civilizations, we often consider that, yeah, if they were advanced, And they had the sufficient technology. If they had flying machines, and if they had this, and if they had that, then, consider that perhaps there was voice activated locking systems. So with that in mind, I was looking at, I have this book titled The Book of Earths by Edna Kenton. And my edition here is 1928. Okay. And when you get into, let me see here, Johannes Kepler. I'm going to share with you a little bit about Johannes Kepler. Here we go. I'm going to read from the Kenton book, The Book of Earths. It was his prolonged observation of the movement of Mars that led Kepler to discover the true form of the planetary orbits, till then considered to be perfectly circular, and it was during the last year of his observations, 1596 AD, that he hit upon his beautiful solution to the cosmographic mystery. He believed in the harmony of the spheres, and all his life he sought for some true and simple law binding the members of the solar system together. His first step was to discover the law connecting the relative distance of the planets, some simple ratio of distances that would do away with the complex and multiplied epicycles and eccentrics with which Ptolemy and his successors had troubled, if not the heavens, the minds of men. By accident, he was brought finally to seek this law of distances through simple geometry. Now, he goes into some interesting stuff, and that leads him to, you've heard of the music of the spheres, right? Okay. In Kepler's drawings of his solids, Kepler associates, let me go back, Kepler associates, he placed the 5 solids between the spheres as follows. Between Saturn and Jupiter, a cube. Between Jupiter and Mars, a tetrahedron. Now think of Hoagland's work with tetrahedral physics and Mars. Isn't that interesting? That Kepler, Kepler in the 16th century is associating a tetrahedron with Mars. Okay. Between Mars and Earth is a dodecahedron. Okay. Now all you Dungeons and Dragons players will immediately be familiar with these shapes, right? And between Earth and Venus was an icosahedron, and between Venus and Mercury was an octahedron. But I find it interesting that in the 16th century, Kepler is associating a tetrahedron to Mars. So, and the way he describes it is, the way Edna Kenton describes what Kepler's talking about is, the sphere of Jupiter is inscribed in a cube to which the sphere of Saturn is circumscribed. The sphere of Jupiter is circumscribed to a tetrahedron in which the sphere of Mars is inscribed, and so on. Within the tetrahedron, he placed fire. Okay. But we go into Kepler's intervals were not only spaces for the 5 mathematical bodies, they were also notes in a harmonic universal scale. Kepler saw them as notes in a harmonic universal scale. Okay? His harmony of the spheres was not only the harmony of movement, but the result of movement, sound. Okay, so the result of this movement was sound. It was unimaginable that the grand revolutions of the spheres through space were made in silence to him. Unimaginable also that the ears of men could hear the prodigious concert of the whole universe in its rapid revolution. As they, men, must close their eyes against the sun, too bright to see, so must their ears be closed against a harmony too vibrant to endure. Okay? So this music of the spheres and as everything goes, and all the sounds that these celestial bodies make as they're moving through space, the sound, a harmony too vibrant to endure. This is the music of the spheres. Goes on. Yet if the ears of man may not hear the music of the spheres, his eyes may follow the paths of celestial sound, said Robert Flood, and straightway began to draw the music of the spheres. This, he wrote at the top of the first figure of his series of world octaves in his Musica Mundana, is the world monochord, with its proportions, harmonies, and intervals of its extramundane movement accurately spaced as herein depicted. Only when the Earth's atmosphere reaches the zone of the moon is the first note struck of the great C major scale. So when the Earth enters, what was that, the zone of the moon, there is a sound that is made, and it's identified a great C major scale. It goes on and on with this discussion, and then down here, and then having given the 2-octaved universe, heaven and earth, and the 1-octave universe stretching from the Godhead to man, he drew a third figure of the 3-octaved universe with its 3 great scales of correspondences. Sound, he says, is the connecting link between the 3 worlds. Vibration is the secret of creation, and through it all secrets may be revealed. Okay, so there's the music of the spheres breakdown, okay, based on Kepler, elaborated on by Flood. And the key is vibration is the secret of creation. He's giving power to sound. Okay, now this is something that in our times, obviously we get this idea, and here I am speaking into a microphone, and it's the vibrations of my vocal cords being picked up, the old mics, like a ribbon mic, if you remember. Johnny Carson used that, vibrations, right? It's all this vibrational stuff. The Tempest technology that you use in surveillance, you aim your scope at a window and the people you're trying to surveil, okay, the vibrations of their voices inside that room can be picked up and focused, okay, and listened to because they're making the windows vibrate. All right. So already we understand the concept of the vibration of sound when we speak. So these words, to get into these tunnels and these caves, like the old Alibaba story, the open sesame, open says me, right? There could be something to it, because that vibrating sound is the thing that unlocks the lock on these doors. So, I thought that was interesting that, here we have the special word, right? The key to pass the guardians and enter the tunnels. So, De Souza told Siegmeister that the tunnel descended through several levels of subterranean cities and farms, but it finally ended in the great hollow at the center of the earth. Siegmeister continued his self-publishing with a 1960 book entitled Nuclear Age Survivors, in which he described himself as a searcher for the concealed entrances to Agartha, much in the same way that Charles Marceau was to claim in I Live with the Tarots. The Tarots is a reference to Richard Shaver from the book that's in this book, I Remember Lemuria. There were the Darrows and the Tarots. Remember, the Darrows were the bad guys down inside the Hollow Earth, beaming up all sorts of naughty things. If you've ever seen the film that I've talked about here, Beyond Lemuria, a Poke Runyon production, you'll know that the Darrows, essentially, in that story, use this beam gun to cause orgasms, essentially. There's some pretty couple of entertaining scenes in Beyond Lemuria in which the sex ray is used. This sounds right up Siegmeister's alley, right? At a very young age, he was inordinately interested in sex. Okay. And, you know, did he get inspired by reading Shaver's stuff in Amazing Stories? Who knows? Siegmeister made trips to the Mato Grosso and Roncador Mountains, but could not find any subterranean entrances. So Siegmeister did go on expeditions. He did go seek this stuff out to no avail. He did not find what he was told was there. Later that year, now remember, this is 1960. Later in 1960, Siegmeister's friends sent him copies of Ray Palmer's articles in Flying Saucers about the Hollow Earth and Admiral Byrd's flight beyond the poles. Okay? And along with some pamphlets on the Hollow Earth by Theodore Fitch. Okay? During this period of 1959 to 1960, Siegmeister wrote Agartha, The Subterranean World, and shortly afterward, he wrote Flying Saucers from the Earth's Interior. Agartha, The Subterranean World, was only 58 pages of self-typed manuscript. It was like a long article, I guess you'd say. And Flying Saucers from the Earth's Interior was only 89 pages. All right. So these are the pieces that will come together and make The Hollow Earth by Raymond Bernard. Okay. So he's been deep into this stuff, and he's already doing writings, various little short works that are leading him to this one book for which he'll be the most famous, ironically, not under his own name. Both of these books outline his belief in the subterranean world and ancient continents and UFOs and all that. Siegmeister was also sent a letter from a man named Otmar Cobb, a secretary to Dr. George Marlowe, the head of the St. Louis organization called UFO World Research. Siegmeister published the letter in his Biosophical Bulletin. The letter stated that Dr. Marlowe was interested in living at Siegmeister's Santa Catarina Monastery. Now, I would like to remind you, Santa Catarina is St. Catherine. And you guys know in my research, I presented St. Catherine's association to the goddess Hecate. At this time, I was unable to get to looking up this Santa Catarina Monastery, but if it is based named after or dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria, this is Hecate. Okay, the Catholic Church has already long ago officially admitted that there was no such thing as St. Catherine of Alexandria, that it was just a syncretization so that they could Catholicize followers of Hecate. That's historical documented fact. You can read about that in Empire of the Wheel 1 by myself and Rick Spence. This goes on with the Cobb and Dr. Marlowe association with Siegmeister. They exchange letters. Dr. Marlowe claims that he'd been in touch for the past several years with two beings named Solmar and Zola. Now, these names appear in George Hunt Williamson's book, The Saucers Speak. Many of you are familiar with George Hunt Williamson. So here's a couple of characters telling Siegmeister about these otherworldly beings, Solmar and Zola. Okay? Dr. Marlowe told Siegmeister that the inner world people called themselves Terrans, and they lived in a lush world in which the sun never set. There were many cities, including Masars II, Eden, Delphi, Jehu, Niji, and Hectea. Again, do we have a Hecate influence on this? The inner world had an ideal climate, Marlowe tells Siegmeister. People 12 to 15 feet tall, birds with 30-foot wingspans, and apples or oranges as large as a man's head. And they also had flying saucers. Siegmeister's believing all of this, okay? The inner world people love to cruise the outer world. Now, again, going back to my dad's claim, his story was that he was taken to Wright-Patterson that summer of '58. He and two or three other guys were, I believe it was two other guys, if I recall right, were briefed on what happened at Roswell the decade prior, right? 1947. And they were told that it had happened again. But they were told that what had happened again was these people from this inner world had been flying their machines out here on the surface, their flying machines. And this time they had survived, or at least one of them had survived the crash. And this civilization had come to, the authorities, military authorities, what have you, to ask for help to find their lost pilot. Okay. But, apparently they like to, even though they want nothing to do with us, they're out, leaving their inner subterranean world to come out to the surface. All right. Now, here we have this character, Dr. Marlowe, telling Siegmeister that the inner world people love to cruise the outer world and pick up contactees to confuse them as to the origins of UFOs. Now, okay, that's what's interesting, because we hear that, back in the 50s and 60s, they would claim to be from Venus, or, in the case of Dernberger, Lanalos, some from Mars, what have you. Okay, now this guy, Dr. Marlowe, is telling Siegmeister, okay, that the inner world people love to just pop up out of the hollow earth and go pick up a contactee to give them disinformation about UFOs. Could that also have been, a staged event by an intelligence agency? Who knows? Siegmeister apparently just really goes all in with this Dr. Marlowe and Solmar and Zola. Okay. And he really believes he's getting the goods from them. This Otmar Cobb with Dr. Marlowe would always make promises of, coming to visit Siegmeister in a flying saucer, but it would never happen. And he would claim, get this Otmar Cobb would claim that agents of the U.S. government would step in to forbid the flights, or he was suddenly called to Washington, D.C. with his flying saucer. Interesting, right? Why would this guy connect the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. to these saucers? Walter Captain Minkle says that Siegmeister finally realized that he had been hoaxed by Marlowe and Otmar Cobb. And it probably wasn't even their real names, right? Siegmeister would go on to warn his readers that if you come here, or don't come here expecting Dr. Raymond Bernard to bring you Atlanteans, he is hot on their trail and must first meet them himself. Right? Before he can introduce you to them, he's got to meet some of them. That's logical. That, of course. After he does, and he secures their permission, he will bring qualified refugees to them. Qualified refugees. The first step is to come to Santa Catarina, the new Holy Land. The next step is the tunnels. So coming away from essentially the tall tales and the hoax perpetrated on him by this Dr. Marlowe and Otmar Cobb and Zola and Zing Zang and, Dippity Doo, whatever their names were. He's just all in. He's going all in. He doesn't care, at least in his public face and in his writings. And he's keenly interested in the tunnels, right? So we continue. By the late 1950s, Siegmeister's biosophical community had stagnated. His island of San Francisco contained only a few poor Brazilians and a few German immigrants from nearby Joinville. German immigrants. This is in Brazil. Okay. This is in the late 1950s. And he's cavorting with German immigrants. Isn't that interesting? German immigrants in South America after World War II. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting? Captain Minkle says, and I have something to say about this Joinville place here in a moment. Says Captain Minkle, when Siegmeister's American correspondents wrote him of their searches for entrances to the inner world in the caves and mountains of Arizona, New Mexico, and northern Mexico, Bernard became especially disturbed. He pleaded with them not to explore the Darrow-haunted caverns of North America. So there's Shaver coming back into Siegmeister's narrative, warning them to stay away from the caves and tunnels of North America. Now, here's what's interesting. In Arizona, Seshari and I, years ago, talked about this. He did a little analysis, and oh boy, I'm trying to. I'm losing the name of the place in Malia. I'm right here. What's the place down by Bisbee? Is it Arivaca? Yes. Okay. Seshari and I, years ago, suspected that in the vicinity of Arivaca, there may be some tunnel and cavern entrances relative to this subterranean world. You got to be very careful, though, in that part of Arizona, because there's a lot of unsavory characters that you got to watch out for. But that is one area. There was a guy that talked about a portal, an interdimensional portal, and that's what sparked mine and Seshari's discussion on this. This is years ago, and he placed that portal in the vicinity of Arivaca. But it is a place where you could very possibly find tunnel entrances and cavern entrances. Now, here's what's interesting about that for me on a personal level. When I asked my mentor about the tunnels and the caverns and stuff. Now, remember, you've heard me talk about my mentor. He's the one that got me into my career with Uncle Sam and the in the intelligence community, national security community. And this is a man who never discouraged me from going into dangerous work, dangerous situations. Only a very few times did he say, don't do something because it could bring me harm or death. One of them was he told me to stay the hell out of the caves and tunnels in North America. No uncertain terms. He said, stay the hell out of them. You don't want to get caught in there. Now, could he be talking about the hazards of spelunking? Perhaps. But this is also the man that taught me how to use necromancy to get information from the dead. So I doubt he was talking about spelunking. But let's go back here. He pleaded with them not to. He felt the Darrow were the outcasts and degenerates expelled from the Lemurian motherland thousands of years ago, and their presence beneath America explained the growth of juvenile delinquency in American cities. That and the Beatles, right? And that evil, that naughty Elvis. Okay. Desperate to convince his American readers to join him in Brazil, he went to work on his final book, The Hollow Earth. The book which is center to our discussion here today. Oh boy. In compiling the book, Siegmeister used material from Reed and Gardner's book. If you're familiar with the Bernard book, the Reed and Gardner material is in there, and it's identified as such. He also drew heavily from Giannini and Palmer's 1960 article in Flying Saucers, both of which concern Byrd's expedition to the South Pole, which Giannini and Palmer had mistakenly said was to the North Pole. Siegmeister later claimed that Byrd had made a secret trip to the North Pole in 1947 rather than admit the mistake. Now, isn't this interesting? And Childress goes on with the details here. The whole thing about Byrd going to the North Pole and seeing this, hidden land, never. It was claimed by the very guys who put the story out there that they had made a mistake. All of Byrd's weird adventures took place in the South Pole. Okay, nothing to do with the North Pole. But here's Siegmeister. Hey, rather than say, "Oh, these guys were in error," it's not. No, he just goes with it. Okay, just like when D'Souza and Marlowe and them had been hoaxing him, he just decides he's all in. He's going with it. Okay, hey, looks good on paper. It entertains the readers, right? So, same thing here. Giannini and Palmer. This is Ray Palmer. Look him up. He's the guy that published the Shaver material. They tell him, or they admit publicly, hey, we made a mistake. It wasn't the North Pole, it was the South Pole. Siegmeister, our friend Siegmeister, a.k.a. Dr. Raymond Bernard, he just says, no, Byrd made a secret trip to the North Pole. Ooh, 1947, the year of Roswell. Now, here's the interesting problem with that. We know that Operation High Jump, which Admiral Byrd was well known to have been he was a figurehead commander. When you look at the actual documentation of that expedition, Admiral Byrd was not in command of that fleet that went down to South America, or the South Pole. I'm sorry. So he was a busy fella. If he did Operation High Jump in 1947, that was in early 47, prior to the Roswell incident. But there he is doing a secret expedition to the North Pole in the same year, according to Siegmeister. Not likely, folks. That's my point. And besides, the two guys who started the whole thing about Byrd going to the poles said the North Pole was a mistake. Now, the difference, by the time Siegmeister gets to his book, The Hollow Earth, the one we all know about, he finally managed to get an actual publishing house interested in it, and they published the book. It's an old company named Fieldcrest. They don't exist anymore. Much of the book was a rewrite of his Flying Saucers from the Earth's Interior. Okay. The Hollow Earth was heavily advertised by Fieldcrest and sold quite well, introducing an entire new generation to the concept of the Hollow Earth. So did my dad read this book? Okay. Fieldcrest sold out to University Books in New York, which recopyrighted the book in 1969. Meanwhile, Siegmeister died in 1965 at his island in Brazil, reportedly of pneumonia. Now, let's pause there for a moment. We're told that Siegmeister died in 1965. Did he? I mean, already he's writing under the name Raymond Bernard, not his real name. Did he finally find his paradise city, so to speak? Did he find what happened to Colonel Fawcett? Okay. Did he find an entrance to one of the tunnels? We don't know. We just know that Siegmeister reportedly dies of pneumonia. And we know this because Walter Koften-Minker reports that the letters he sent to Siegmeister were simply returned to him with deceased marked on them. Did Siegmeister, decide that maybe he was truly, getting to the end of his life, or he had this illness or something, and he decided to pull himself, out of public view or out of his circle of friends, out of contact, in a way that would be mysterious. In other words, was it a case of he knew he was going to die anyway, but he decided to let it happen under mysterious circumstances that nobody could prove it. I mean, we'd have to really dig into looking for a death certificate, that kind of thing, maybe a grave site. But Siegmeister dies in 1965. His book, The Hollow Earth, written under his pseudonym, Dr. Raymond Bernard, had little new material about the Hollow Earth in it except for interesting material on tunnel entrances in Brazil. Okay? So it was a rehash of his work, of Reed and Gardner's work, some of Palmer's stuff, but it offered fresh material on the tunnels in Brazil. Let me see. Now, here's what's interesting about the tunnels in Brazil, folks. They exist. Yes, indeed they do. Let me find... Now, gosh, Rudy, where is it? Right here. Now, David Childress, I've talked about this before, he personally has explored one of these tunnels in a place called St. Thomas of the Letters, St. Thomas das Lettres. Excuse my pronunciation. I'm sorry about that. My mispronunciation. And here's how David Childress describes this tunnel. It didn't take long to find the tunnel entrance. Already 4 or 5 young people were gathered around the entrance looking into the wide cavern. The entrance was quite large. It was a wide mouth of a cave with a mound of dirt creating a small hill over the entrance. The cavern entrance faced to the west and immediately began running downhill into the earth. The tunnel would have to go downhill as we were essentially on top of a mountain. With our flashlights in hand, we entered the cavern. Within a few meters, the cavern entrance narrowed into a tunnel, which was about 3 meters or 9 feet high and 2 meters wide. The tunnel was dug out of dirt and was not cut out of solid rock, as some tunnels are. The tunnel headed downward at a steady slope, but it was not too steep. A small channel made by running water moving through this part of the tunnel was in the middle of the floor, sort of a small trail itself worn into the floor by the water. At no point was it ever necessary to duck, stoop, or crawl in this tunnel. Quite the opposite. It was quite wide and high, even for the tallest man to walk through, even someone who was, say, 7 feet tall. I was amazed at this ancient feat of engineering. We were descending down into the earth in a wide, gradually sloping tunnel that was dug into a red clay-type dirt. It was not the smooth, laser-cut rock walls that Erich von Daniken had claimed to have seen in Ecuador in his book Gold of the Gods, but it was just as incredible. It wouldn't have taken some space-age device to make this tunnel, just simple tools. Yet, it was clearly a colossal undertaking. Why would anyone build such a tunnel? Was it an ancient mine that went deep into the earth, searching for an elusive vein of gold, or merely red clay for the long-gone ceramic kilns? Was it an elaborate escape tunnel used in the horrific wars that were said to have been fought in South America and around the world in the distant past? I think that's referring to the Vedic, the Mahabharata wars and things like that. Or was it some bizarre subterranean road that linked up with other tunnels in the Andes and ultimately could be used to journey safely to such places as Machu Picchu, Cusco, or the Atacama Desert? Maybe a combination of all three. Now, if you recall, I talk about this in The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, in which I suggest, and it has to be a suggestion, it has to be a mere speculative proposal, because Sir Richard Francis Burton disappeared for 4.5 months in the South American wilderness, and to this day we have no idea what he was doing or where he was. And his little Christmas party story about being chased by bandits across the mountains, and that does not explain 4.5 months of being missing. Okay, a man who, my God, wrote about everything he ever did. Okay. Remember I told you when he was in Salt Lake City earlier in this episode, he was there for 3 weeks. He even wrote a book about that. And it's the most boring, dry thing you have ever read. I read it. Every word gave me headaches. That's how boring and dry it was. My point is, the man never left any of his travels undocumented, except for that 4.5 months. Okay? He was hiding something. Okay, he was on some type of mission, an expedition, and the clue he gives in his books, a 2-volume book, Explorations Through the Central Highlands of Brazil, in the appendix, he prints a photo of manuscript 512, which was written in the 18th century in Portuguese, and he prints the English translation of manuscript 512, which talks about the finding of a lost city in the Central Highlands of Brazil. But yet in this book, he doesn't say one word about manuscript 512. He doesn't say one word about lost cities. He just writes this mundane, dry book, kind of a travel log of being in that jungle and looking at mines and things like that. And he includes the mysterious manuscript and its English translation, which, by the way, was the first English translation of manuscript 512, and it was done by he and his wife. Basically, what Burton's telling you in that book, Explorations Through the Central Highlands of Brazil, by including manuscript 512 in its translation in the appendix, he's telling you without telling you that that's exactly what he was looking for. Is that city of manuscript 512. So what does that have to do with the tunnels? I propose, when I have to, if I had to guess and speculate and propose what he could have been doing on this expedition, I argue that he would have been aware of the tunnels, and where the tunnels still existed, he would have journeyed through them, and perhaps maybe where they would have and could have collapsed, he would have followed the collapse. But what I'm saying is, I argue that the tunnels had something to do with what Sir Richard Francis Burton was doing during those missing months in South America. And here, let's go back to David Childress, some years ago, personally exploring the mysterious tunnel in Sao Tome das Letras in Brazil. Marley, Carl, and I continued walking through the tunnel for a kilometer or so. Other visitors to Sao Tome das Letras followed us into the subterranean system. The tunnel was not perfectly straight, but wound left and right and occasionally dropped down a few feet and continued on. It was perfectly dry, and the air was fresh and quite breathable. Eventually, that suggests some pretty smart engineering, right? Eventually, after an hour or so, we came to a spot in the tunnel where it suddenly dropped down about 1.5 meters. It was not a great obstacle, and we could see the tunnel continuing downward, but it was a convenient place to stop. We took a break and decided to go back to the surface. We had no intention of continuing for several days to the fabled Room of 4 Doors deep beneath Brazil. We simply weren't prepared for such an expedition. Now, what is the Room of 4 Doors? David told me about this for the first time. I was on a trip to Mexico with him in 2002. And that's when he told me the story of this Room of 4 Doors. He said that the Brazilian army, a local unit, sent a patrol, a squad, a platoon, whatever, a squad of soldiers into this same tunnel that he was just describing in San Tomás das Letras in Brazil. And they apparently journeyed into it for several days. And they came to this room where there were 4 additional tunnels continuing on deeper into the earth. And they turned back at that point because it was a matter of supplies and things, right? They had enough to get back safely and, have that margin. And that was how he first heard about the tunnel in San Tomás das Letras in Brazil. Now, here's what's interesting. Burton, in his book, and in the book Explorations Central Highlands of Brazil, and in other writings, Burton spent time in San Tomás das Letras. You think maybe Burton was checking out the tunnel? I think so, and I talk about it. Let me show you the book in case you want to get it. WalterBosley.com or Lulu.com, but I believe it's at WalterBosley.com. Folks, if I must say so myself, and I'm going to because I'm proud of it, this is one of my best books, one of my most solid works. So, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. Okay? If you're interested in what I'm talking about, read that book. So, going back to Siegmeister, the real man behind Dr. Raymond Bernard in the book, The Hollow Earth. Now, here is, okay, here we go. Okay, so we have Siegmeister going into the, discussing the Brazilian tunnels, right? In his book, The Hollow Earth. He was one of the first to bring up the conspiracy angle to flying saucers and the Hollow Earth, something that had not been discussed at length before. So again, here we have Siegmeister, okay, with his book, The Hollow Earth, written under the name Dr. Raymond Bernard, really kicking off this idea of the UFOs coming from the Hollow Earth. All right. I'll continue. The Hollow Earth goes beyond other books of its genre by suggesting that flying saucers were coming from inside the Earth rather than outer space. In fact, the first chapter of The Hollow Earth wasn't about the Hollow Earth at all, but rather about UFOs and government secrecy, as the chapter was entitled. Now, I had that flagged, and our friend Daniel List will be, if I'm sure he's interested already in what I'm saying, but this reminded me, this is Ex Protect right here, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm getting it right, the team that hides all this stuff from us. Here's Bernard, okay, in his book, eventually published in 1964, okay, the very first chapter in The Hollow Earth is UFOs and government secrecy. Siegmeister made the rational point that if there were holes at the poles and flying saucers were coming from this interior Earth, then the U.S. government must be covering up this incredible discovery, along with the origin of the flying saucers. Did Siegmeister figure out the Ex-Protect people? You got to wonder, and it's in the book. Flying saucers from the Earth's interior was the great secret of our time, claimed Siegmeister, and it was being kept a secret by the U.S. government. Actually, get this, a secret military intelligence community within our government that controlled such black projects. Ex-Protect, right? Here we see the beginnings of a conspiracy that claimed that the U.S. government and the Russians were working together. Again, we talk about, JFK, one of the reasons that some sources say he was assassinated was because he was going to share our space technology with the Russians. Here you have Siegmeister during the Kennedy presidency claiming that, that the U.S. and the Russians were working secretly together. I find this really interesting. This Siegmeister guy just gets more interesting as goofy as he was. Walter Siegmeister was a true believer in the old books on the Hollow Earth and had clearly read issues of amazing stories that constituted the Shaver mystery. Though Siegmeister's claims were fantastic and often delusional, some evidence for his tunnels in Brazil, as well as UFO bases in South America, has emerged since the 60s. David Childress quotes a report from September 1998 of Brazil's Society of Extraterrestrial Studies. Back then was investigating a flurry of reports of strange tunnels in the mountains of Santa Catarina and Paraná these states. The tunnel sightings are the tunnel UFO sightings. Strange tunnels in the mountains of Santa Catarina and Paraná. The tunnel sightings are concentrated around the city of Joinville in Santa Catarina State, about 304 kilometers southwest of Sao Paulo. Recently, 2 explorers entered a tunnel near Ponta Grossa. They spent 5 days in a subterranean city of more or less 50 inhabitants. The men also claimed to have entered a tunnel in Rincano in the Serra de Paranapiacaba Mountains in the state of Parana. I really hope I pronounced that right. And discovered a staircase underground leading to 4 different levels. In another case, a man identified as JD, a guide for Montana Misterioso in Joinville, Santa Catarina, said that many times luminous flying saucers have been seen around the opening of the tunnel and that he heard a chorus of men and women singing underground. Now, I told you we would come back to the Joinville mystery, and that is the Joinville chorus. Look it up. UFOs exiting tunnels and people hearing what sounds like a chorus of men and women singing. Now, remember what I said about Kepler and the music of the spheres. And maybe he figured out the secret power of sound. So could it be that what sounds like voices singing, okay, this chorus, could it be that the flying saucers in that particular case are somehow using the power of the music of the spheres that Kepler and Flood talk about, this harmonic energy to power, their flights. This also reminds me of the airship mystery, in which many witnesses would hear a music, and not necessarily like a song or a melody, musical tones as they would see the mystery airships fly overhead and pass by them. Were the mystery airships of the 1890s also using this power of sound, this power of harmonics, to propel, to counter gravity, the same as possibly these flying saucers. When you have something like that mentioned, this Joinville chorus mystery, you have to wonder if, Kepler was onto something, if Flood, fleshed it out, and if, the idea of the secret password, saying the particular word, sonically unlocks levers, latches, whatever it needs to unlock, and or activate some type of counter gravity balancing mechanism. I don't know, because of the vibration. What's going on here? Is this not just some mystical, oh, it's a sound of a chorus singing? People tend to mystify or mysticize strange experiences for lack of a better explanation, or because it's more fun to them than maybe thinking, well, maybe this is some type of technology, right? So I find that really interesting. And let's see, what else do I have in here that I wanted to... I read to you about the tunnel. Now, go back to Siegmeister and this idea of breeding a super race. I find that to be a very disturbing aspect of Siegmeister's pursuits, okay, particularly within the context of his times. Did we not learn our lesson about this kind of thinking, by the end of World War II? Apparently, Siegmeister did not. In Nazi occult doctrine, it is here that the Nazi supermen lived. The Nazis in Central Asia. Shambhala and Agartha are associated with the hollow earth theories of certain groups, including the Nazis. In these, the inside of the earth, which is thought to be hollow, contains the sacred territory of Agartha. In Nazi occult doctrine, it is here that the Nazi supermen lived. The Nazis hoped to contact these supermen, who were a central part of their own hollow earth, eternal ice ideology. Okay? You have, according to ancient legends, in the book Le Roi du Monde by René Guénon, there was a cataclysm in the Gobi Desert So the sons of intelligences of beyond took up their abode in the vast underground encampment under the Himalayas. They split up into two groups, one the Agardi, following the right-hand way of meditation and goodness, and the other the Shambhalas, following the left-hand way of evil and violence. Now, this reminds me of what our friend Dark Journalist shares with us about what Edgar Casey talks about long ago, right? With the sons of Belial and the two-eye stone and all of that. This, here we have, this kind of stuff in the background of talking about Siegmeister and these tunnels and such. The point is, bringing that last part up, is that Siegmeister, there's some issues with him and this pursuit of the super race. You have to wonder what was this obsession, the sexual obsession that we're told that he started his young life with. Was he involved in some type of breeding experiments beyond, what little we know? For instance, when he was going to start that commune on the eastern slope of the Andes, was Siegmeister in contact with post-war Nazis? Okay, were Marlowe and D'Souza and these people, were they Nazis? Okay, because we're not even sure those are their real names. It appears those weren't their real names. Could Siegmeister have been led astray by Nazis living in South America after the war? Possibly members of the Ononurba who believed in this stuff themselves. Or were they feeding Siegmeister a bunch of baloney, okay, to cover for technological experimentation and development of, independent or breakaway society flying saucer technology? In other words, were the saucers, whatever they were, very real? Okay, but they didn't want people to know, obviously, that they were Nazi aerospace engineers and the like developing these things. And so they fed Siegmeister, possibly, all this nonsense so that he would write the books that he wrote, because they couldn't assume that the contactee fans, the spiritualists, the Theosophy students, the people interested in ufology, back in the 50s and 60s, would much rather believe these stories of a hollow earth and this race of supermen and this lost civilization in the hollow earth than they would, that it was just post-war Nazis, doing their thing to survive, to secure their place in the world of influencing nations. That's a whole other discussion, as you know, and we've had that here a lot. But it looks to me, now that we know, and this information's been out there for several years. David Childers published this book. I got a box of them because we, being a publisher. 1999 is when David published this. Siegmeister, Walter Siegmeister, is the true identity of so-called Dr. Raymond Bernard, author of The Hollow Earth, the very famous book on this subject, very popular book, I should say, published in 1964, and it's still out there. Believe me, folks, it's still out there. Many of you have this book. I've had it since the late 80s. It has influenced all of us to varying degrees in one way or another in our beliefs about the hollow earth. And, we come to find out that there was no Dr. Raymond Bernard, that it's this Walter Siegmeister guy of New York. whose parents were Russians. Well, Russian-born, citizens that migrated to the U.S. Clearly a German name. Could there have always been some link to Nazi Germany through Siegmeister's life? Could his being German, despite having been born, or his parents having been born in Russia, could his being of German extraction have engendered trust from them, to associate with him? I would say that if you had any doubts before about any Nazi mythology having influenced the Raymond Bernard book, The Hollow Earth, this whole revelation, so to speak, I think should serve to dispel those doubts, because it's looking more and more to me like Siegmeister was led astray to some degree by post-war Nazis and their associates. Perhaps Siegmeister was on to truth and real things that the Nazis were involved in, that they themselves were exploring and looking into, or had a presence in, and they did not want, to be identified as such. It doesn't make sense to me to want this author to tell stories of, a utopian or society, or a very mysterious romantic notion of a lost civilization in these tunnels. Because if you didn't want people knowing what you were up to down there, because that would draw people to the tunnels. But maybe what they could have been doing was diverting him. Now, if you recall, if you go back earlier in Siegmeister's work, remember his original intention was to put in, to establish a commune to breed super humans, right? And he was going to do it in the eastern Andes mountains. But then he ends up going off on a tangent with the tunnels. Maybe consider that if he was being influenced and led astray by post-war Nazis, doing their undercover things down in South America, maybe they were pushing him over to Brazil to get him out of the Andes. Maybe he was getting a little too close to, Bariloche, San Carlos de Bariloche. Maybe he was getting too close to what I would call, NIMSA facilities, right? So perhaps they needed to push him over to Brazil and the tunnels and the faucet mystery and stuff like that. I don't know. It's all speculation, because there's so much we don't know. But it's okay to speculate when you're trying to, piece things together and get some idea of what might be going on. So, again, you know how things work here at the Walter Bosley channel. I'm going to be revisiting this topic, but there it is for you, a basic foundation. Walter Siegmeister, The True Identity of Dr. Raymond Bernard, author of the very popular book, been around for decades, The Hollow Earth. And I think it might contribute to, the investigations of others into who knows the secrets of UFOs, who knows the secrets of, the Earth's past, and is keeping them away from people or diverting our attention. And to me, the Bernard book, The Hollow Earth, might have been one of those biggest diversions of all. Siegmeister himself a true believer, but misled, right? So anyway, this has been an extra special long episode, and I'm going to go to questions in the live chat. We're not done yet. I'm not out of here yet. So let's go to questions in the live chat. Remember, folks, here's the rules. If you're new here, all caps, okay? Your questions or comments, if you want them acknowledged, must be presented in all capital letters for me to know that you're talking to me, that you're asking a question of me. Um, and Crypto Alchemist, I don't know. Yeti did not come into the conversation, so I don't know. Megalithic Yard. Yes, can you give us the name of the Childress book again slowly? Yes, it is Lost. Let me see. Lost Continents and the Hollow Earth by David Hatcher Childress. It includes I Remember Lemuria and the Shaver Mystery. It includes the two classic Shaver books, if you're familiar with Richard Shaver. So Lost Continents and the Hollow Earth, okay, by David Hatcher Childress. Crypto Alchemist, great show as always. Walter Bosley, we'll see you at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Yes, thank you, Crypto. Thank you. Yep. You're welcome, Megalith. Gustavo Garcia Echeverria says, Siegmeister, interesting name, meaning master of victory. Oh, okay. Nick N says, I will repeat Marco's question. Equals, that is, how much truth is there in the novel The Coming Race? That's a good question. You got to wonder. I haven't done a deep dive on that, but you do have to wonder, how much did that author find? Now, while we're waiting for the next question, I have a bit of an unboxing because our friend Ron Mears sent me a box that I got yesterday, and I've got to share with you what's in it because I know you guys are interested in my Napoleon research. For those of you who don't know, if you're new here, I'm the author of a book of titled The Esoteric Napoleon. And check this out. Ron Mears sent me this amazing, look at this. This is an 1871 edition. And I'm going to go back to the questions on the topic. I'm just briefly wanting to share this incredible, it's titled The Court of Napoleon. And it's by, oh boy. Let me get to the title page. By F.B. Goodrich, okay? And it was entered according to an act of Congress in the year 1856, but this is an 1871 edition. Ron, this is a beautiful book. My gosh, I love these. And it's just going to have fantastic information, contemporary, of right after Napoleon, died. This is just incredible. Thank you, Ron. This is incredibly generous of you. Thank you so much. I mean, I love these historical volumes. This is a beautiful book, very beautiful book. And because I'm a fan of, you guys know, I'm a kit model nut. Let me show you what else he sent me. Look at this, a pretty good scale size of a Klingon bird of prey from the movies. Ain't that cool? Yeah, Ron, you know what I like. Thank you very much. I will be doing a box opening and talking about this kit in a future dedicated video to the kit. So thank you, Ron Mears. Let's go back to the questions on tonight's topic. Interesting that CJ Star Monkey 73 asked, was Napoleon interested in inner Earth at all? I'll let you know in the next book because I'm looking into all the weird things Napoleon was into, and you'll find it interesting. Mike does. Have you come across energy tech regarding the swastika symbol? I haven't done a deep dive on it. I know that a couple of writers of books that I have discussed that. But in the stuff I've been looking at, no. Philip Blair, did you read anything about Buddhist or Egyptian or Hindu symbolism underground, like in the Grand Canyon? You mean in the Siegmeister stuff? No, but I mean, I am very familiar with that through other research. Michael Winstanley asks, who funded Burton's trips around the world? Oh, that's interesting. Now, in my book, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, I propose, and I'm pretty confident with this, speculative hypothesis. I propose that Burton was not only working for British intelligence, but very likely some type of private society dedicated to occulted and esoteric knowledge. I think he was working for both. And this mysterious organization plus British intelligence probably recruited him out of Oxford when he was a young man. Polymathing says, phenomenal stream. Love the music of the spheres portion. Could you expound on that more possibly? That's about what I know right now, but in the future, I definitely will get into that because I've always been intrigued by the Joinville chorus story. And if you guys recall, when I had my overdose on guarana and I was having the extremely vivid dream, I was hearing the musical tones accompanying this colors in the sky. It was our friend Joseph Farrell likes, I see colors when he's, goofing on New Agers, but I saw colors. I'm sorry, it was a dream. But the sound was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And yet it wasn't a melody. It wasn't a particular song. It was just musical in its nature. And I would love to hear that sound again. That's how amazing it was. For what it's worth, I don't know if I had, a dream encounter with the music of the spheres or not. But Hollow Earth, Hello Earth. Yeah. Oh, yes. Megalithic Yard. Keeley, John W. Keeley, John Worrell Keeley, was also into musical frequencies, and Tesla was big on frequency too. Exactly. Keeley and Tesla understood the sound. And you know what? I don't know if maybe Edward Leedskalnin wasn't tapped into this knowledge too. Music of Ari Bavel, the music of the spheres sounds like Dr. Joseph Farrell's cup of tea. I would agree. Michael Winstanley, practice chanting, Walter. Okay. Crypto Alchemist, overdoing or high? You mean the guarana? I had overdone a particular energy drink over the course of 2 weeks. I was just pounding this particular energy drink that was heavy in guarana. And it just hit me with bad vertigo that I was down for 4 days. Not the nausea type of vertigo, just the everything spinning and the wildest, most vivid dreams. It was just wow. I almost would like to experiment with overdose or high dose of guarana in a samadhi tank, a sensory deprivation tank. I think that would be interesting. Oh my God. Okay, yeah, there we go. I'm clicking the wrong things here. So, any more questions or comments? Yeah, Crypto Alchemist. The idea of a heart attack is not. I quit doing the energy drinks. That was I quit doing that. I would still do them up until last year, but I was very careful about which ones. Malia will tell you how careful. I was very careful because she would help me pick them out. And because there's some that I like. Like I like the Ahani New, I think it's called. I like their stuff. The cherry one. I like the purple one, the rockets on it. You guys remember when I would do beverage of the week? And yes, Marcos Toledo, that's what I'm saying about Edward Leedskounen. Could sound be the secret that he used, or at least vibration, used to build Coral Castle all by himself? Megalithic Yard asks, have you tried white gold powder for psychic effects? No, I have not. Maybe I should. What do you think, Malia? She says it sounds good. We should try it. Michael Winstanley, have you looked into the Turkish underground cities? I'm only aware, Cappadocia. Everybody knows about Cappadocia, but I haven't looked, no pun intended, deeper than that into the Turkish underground cities. But, perhaps I should. So, any more questions on tonight's topic? Comments or questions on Walter Siegmeister, the true identity of Dr. Raymond Bernard, the author of the immensely popular book, The Hollow Earth? Again, my conclusion right now is that it looks like he was very likely put off the trail of something by post-war Nazis in South America. Ed Leedskounen also put great importance into the moon and sun cycles. Also, I make pure white gold powder. We'll show you tomorrow. Okay, cool. Mike does. CJ Starmuck asks, can you end the program with Underground by David Bowie from Labyrinth? I don't fool with the music thing because of the monetization and the copyright hits. Music is a nightmare on YouTube. So that's why you don't hear me using anything but that which our good friend Todd Wood has composed and performed. So, but CJ, imagine Underground by David Bowie as the show ends. How about that? We've had a pretty good turnout tonight, I got to tell you. This is an interesting subject that I will absolutely revisit. Philip Blair, The Mystery of the Tahoe's Caves. Have you read? Yes. And I've watched the documentary. And I think there's something to these things. CJ is doing that. Is that Luna? Malia?
No.
Oh,
just Luna.
Different Luna.
Well, then that's Luna. If it says Luna.
It says Luna.
Then it's Luna.
Hey, Luna. All the way down there in Australia. Thank you, Megalith. I'm glad you made it also. And I think that's why I like this time. This is a good time to come on. Polymathing asks, is there a false UFO invasion launch from Antarctica coming soon? The problem is that there could be, right? That's one of the issues. Nick N., don't forget to plug your publishing company's Caverns and Creatures book. I published William Michael Mott's Caverns, and do we have that right here? I don't think we have one handy, but anyway, that I'll make sure I'll bring one over because I'm at the studio, the LGH Services studio, that is provided by Malia Grimm, the show's producer, and my library's over at my house. Crypto Alchemist, hit that like button, everyone, and please buy Walter's books. Yes, indeed. Thank you. And you can even throw super chats at me. If you see the button down there, don't be shy. If you have all the books, throw super chats. As the model kit builder YouTuber Harry Houdini that I follow says, buy me a coffee, buy me a curry. He's down there in Australia, by the way. If you like kit model building, check out Houdini's models, Harry Houdini. Philip Blair. Luna says, yes, it is her. Philip Blair, Mysteries of the Taos Caves by Alex Cianetti, Javier Serra. Got the spelling wrong. Here it is. He's interested. Neil Armstrong. Have you looked into his investigation? Like I said, I've read the book and seen the documentary. Oh my God, this thing jumps on me and I clicked the wrong things. CJ, any form borealis on the horizon? Not planned, but I did one recently, which should be in his archive. And yes, indeed, the Burton book, I'm very proud of it. I did a particularly good job on that. So, okay, folks, I want to thank all of you who have been here and stuck out this extra long episode. I think this was important material that I wanted to get out there because The Hollow Earth is a very popular book in our community. And like I said, it has been for decades. And it's always interesting to learn more about the people who write these books, what influenced them, who influenced them. And, it helps us determine how to absorb the material in question. If you don't have Bernard's Hollow Earth book, by all means, get a copy. It's worth having. Because of what we talked about tonight doesn't mean that there's nothing of value in it. Sometimes you come to the truth by looking at all the stuff that's around it. Okay. Or by examining what's blocking you from getting to the truth. That can tell you something, okay? I'm a professional investigator, all right? And when you're a spy hunter, especially, this is the way you have to go about things, okay? Is by looking at everything. You can't be inside the box, and you do throw spaghetti on the wall. Ari, Malia and I are going to be on with Crypto Alchemist. That's what's going on at 7. So anyway, again, Ron Mears, thank you for this. This is a beautiful edition, an amazing book. This is going to be right up there with my first American edition, Around the World in 80 Days. I do have a few, old volumes like this, and I love these things. Thank you. I don't see Ron here, but I will also be doing a dedicated video on the model that Ron sent to me, the Bird of Prey. So look for that. And you're welcome, D. Dorothy. Okay, there's Crypto Alchemist. See you at 7 p.m. tomorrow. The link tonight. Okay, thank you. Okay, folks. Wow, this, like I said, this has been a extra long episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I think you did. The live chat's been here steady and active, and we've had a pretty good number of viewers, and I truly appreciate it. Anyway, Malia and I will see you on Saturday night as usual. And you guys have a good night. Thanks again.